Good morning. I am Laura Chilkot, and I am giving a first-person presentation of the life of Clara Barton, Universalist exemplar of compassion. And before I begin, I want to share with you that I am dedicating this presentation to my late aunt, Miss Susan Chilkot. She was a nurse in northeastern Connecticut in the 1940s through the 1970s. She, like Clara Barton, was married to her profession of nursing. My aunt never married, and her greatest goal was to provide excellent patient care for everyone at the hospital. After she died, someone wrote that my aunt had the same level of dedication as Clara Barton. So it is with that beautiful thought that I dedicate this to you, Aunt Sue. Good morning. I am Clara Barton. Although I am probably best known for working tirelessly on Civil War battlefields to nurse the soldiers, and also for the founding of the American Red Cross, there was a lot more to the story of my life. I was born on December 25th, 1821, on my parents' farm in North Oxford, Massachusetts. My parents were founders of the Universalist Church in North Oxford, and on Sundays, our family would travel 5 miles to church in a horse-drawn cart. I remember the church as austere, with tall box pews and tall, narrow seats, where the faith was hammered out in an incongruous winter atmosphere. I do attribute Universalism as being formative in my character. And although I did explore other ways of thinking, I always came back to Universalism. However, throughout some of my life, I felt sympathy for deistic thinking, believing that God created the universe, withdrew, and then essentially let it run on its own. Also, for a time, I was drawn to Christian Science, one of the new mid-19th century religions formed in Upper New York State, which advocated mental healing over traditional mental cures, and also promoted vegetarianism. I did, by the way, become a vegetarian for a time. And also, I want to mention my interest in spiritualism, yet another mid-19th century religion that developed in Upper New York State. This religion believed that the deceased could communicate through mediums. As did my friend Susan B. Anthony, the Unitarian. I consulted with mediums from time to time so I could have a chat with the departed. For my entire life, however, I claim Universalism as my religion. And though not a churchgoer in the traditional manner, I fully believed the Universalist precept that the way to lead a fulfilling life is to do good. Now back to my childhood. I was the youngest of 5, very intelligent, and could read by age 3. Older brothers taught me to ride horses, which I loved, and I developed into a tomboy. I was teased in school for this, and also for being an ugly duckling. My mother had a ferocious temper, and my parents fought a lot, which gave me nightmares. Imagine my mother serving us rotten fruit or making delicious pies that she would not let us eat until they were just about spoiling. In such an atmosphere, I became very shy, and so afraid was I of causing a stir that I would not, for example, even ask for gloves to wear in winter. You can much imagine that I was much closer to my father than my mother, and how I loved as a child to hear my father recount stories of his dealings with the Indians and of my grandfather's experiences in the Revolutionary War. Hearing about cannons and guns and battles, I believed, helped prepare me for my own work in the Civil War battlefields. My father's warm patriot blood ran in my veins. When I was just 14 years old, my childhood abruptly ended when a serious fall rendered my brother David as an invalid. For the next 2 years, I took it upon myself to nurse him day and night through his convalescence. I administered all his medicine, including the great, loathsome, crawling leeches. This experience was a foreshadowing of what was to become my life work, as well as showing me how much I needed to be needed. After 2 years of devoting myself to nursing my brother, I was shyer than ever. So my parents consulted a phrenologist who advised teaching as a way to overcome shyness. You know phrenology, the pseudoscience of matching traits to shapes in the head. That was very popular in the 19th century, by the way. So, as I was saying, it was recommended that I become a teacher based on the phrenology assessment. And I first worked in my brother's mill. I taught the mill workers there. And then I taught in school for a number of years. I subsequently left Massachusetts, moved to Borden, New Jersey, where, upon my own initiative, I formed a free public school for students, and the school's enrollment greatly expanded. When I was replaced by a man to lead the school and had to settle for a $250 annual salary, while the man was given $600 for the annual salary to run the school that I created, I left. At this point, I had outgrown teaching, was totally worn out, and suffered a nervous breakdown. And as you will see in my life, it usually went this way. I would get deeply involved in my endeavors, be totally committed to them, and then after a while have to leave for some form of nervous exhaustion, but then only to rest and renew and come back stronger than ever. After a period of rest and regaining my strength, I then obtained a job in the US Patent Office in Washington, D.C., copying patents. At this time, women were just beginning to be allowed to work in the patent office. I could copy those patents with lightning speed, faster than any man, and the men resented this. I became known as the pest in petticoats. I later left to go nurse my ailing father back in Massachusetts. Just as well. I was so tired of that office and the unfairness. When my father was dying, we had a conversation that later changed my life. He gave me a command. As a patriot, he charged me to serve my country with all I had, even with my life if need be. As the daughter of a Mason, he charged me to seek and comfort the afflicted everywhere. And as a Christian, he charged me to honor and love mankind. With the advent of the Civil War, the next phase of my life, my mission was about to begin. And in 1861, I was able to help with the 6th Massachusetts Regiment, which came from my part of Massachusetts. At this time in history, conditions on the battlefield were dire, with few supplies, lack of sanitation, and a lack of nurses and doctors. Furthermore, all nurses had previously been male nurses, and even the doctors were often wary of women nurses. However, after women nurses got special permission to work in the battlefields, so many more lives could be saved. I appeared on the battlefield with badly needed bandages. Certainly an improvement over making bandages with corn husks and supplies. You see, I had organized campaigns with people back home to send bandages, knitted goods, food, tobacco, and spirits. I helped soldiers write letters to families and comforted them, cooked barrels of soup for the men. Many men, some of whom were former students, died in my arms. I was like a mother and sister to so many of these soldiers. I also managed an evacuation of soldiers via ambulances and train to hospitals where they could receive further treatment. I worked tirelessly for days on end and stayed until the last wounded man was boarded onto the train. I was determined to be where I could do some good, including Fredericksburg and Antietam. Even hotels and mansions were turned into makeshift hospitals. And over again, I saw helpless men fainting, having sunstroke, filthy, hungry, begging me for a cracker to keep from starving or a cup of water. Throughout the war, again and again, I would make legislators aware of the dire conditions and beg for assistance. Since my stories checked out as true, the assistance came. I might add that in 1863, there was a woman named Sarah Hale. Have you heard of Sarah Hale? I'll bet you know her poem for children, Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb. Well, this editor and author of Mary Had a Little Lamb had been lobbying the government for 14 years to make Thanksgiving a national holiday. In 1864, Abraham Lincoln listened to her, and as a result, Thanksgiving became a national holiday. Sarah wanted this so badly because she felt that it would help to unify a country torn apart by war. And for the first Thanksgiving, I happened to be in South Carolina. And how did we celebrate Thanksgiving? All of the women ate turkey and all of the men ate roasted pig. The first national Thanksgiving. At the end of the war in 1864, President Lincoln put me in charge of tracing the fate of 30,000 soldiers and to mark the graves of Union soldiers buried in Andersonville, Georgia. This project expanded into a nationwide campaign to identify soldiers missing during the Civil War. I published lists of soldiers' names in papers, newspapers, and exchanged letters with veterans and soldiers' families. The Missing Persons Office still exists in Washington, D.C. And if you're ever there, you might like to visit this museum to learn more about it. After my project came to an end, at the invitation of Susan B. Anthony, leader of the women's suffrage movement, I joined the lecture circuit to talk not just about the Civil War, but also about women's rights. During this time, I met Frederick Douglass and became an activist for Black rights as well. I remained on the lecture circuit for several years and was paid well, but the war had taken its toll and I had become debilitated and could not even speak. In 1870, my doctor suggested that I take a vacation in Europe. While on vacation there, I learned about the International Red Cross, an organization that helped injured soldiers and the doctors and nurses that cared for them. Before long, I was involved in relief efforts related to the Franco-Prussian War, helping refugees, the homeless, and the hungry. I was so impressed with the International Red Cross because in Europe, the Geneva Convention allowed for doctors, nurses, and ambulances bearing the symbol of the Red Cross to be able to go help wounded people without being shot at. Though the United States was no longer at war, this idea inspired me to form an American version of the Red Cross that would provide relief. When I returned to the United States, it took until 1881 before a United States president would advocate for the formation of the American Red Cross. I became the leader of the American Red Cross in 1881, just in time to provide relief efforts for a region in Michigan that was rampaged by wildfires. And later, the Red Cross provided help when the Ohio River flooded the banks. The Red Cross also provided assistance when yellow fever swept through Jacksonville, Florida. The list could go on and on. I did travel to Armenia in 1896 to assist starving and sick citizens during the Armenian massacre by the Turks. I ran the Red Cross until I was 80 years old. Then I retired to my home in Glen Echo, Maryland. I wrote a book about the American Cross and one about my childhood. During this time, I learned many were naming their newborn daughters Clara after me, as well as some streets. I died at age 90 at home in Maryland on April 12, 1912, of double pneumonia. Atop my casket were hundreds of red carnations. Red was my favorite color, by the way. And these carnations were arranged in a cross. I understand thousands attended my funeral. A train took me home to North Oxford, Massachusetts, where I was buried in the family plot. Others are writing my biography, and let it rest as others elect it. I have lived my life well and ill, and always less well than I wanted to be. But it is as it is, and as it has been, so small a thing to have had so much about it.